At 29, I married myself off. Everyone said I hit the jackpot. The groom was as slender as a spring onion, resembling a fair-skinned version of Louis Koo. With a well-toned body from years of working out, he sported 8 perfect abs and a charming smile with tiny fangs. He came from a wealthy family and had a lucrative income. As for me, I was much more ordinary. My family background was average, and although I loved my job, it didn't pay well. Aside from my looks, I had little to boast about, and even those were the result of years of cosmetic adjustments since I was 16. Now, in 2050, such things are as routine as eating a meal. As for why the groom chose me, he said I was his soulmate. By soulmate, he didn't mean discussing poetry and philosophy. Rather, it meant me handing him a toothpick after he flossed, or me being his support when he led the charge. He said, "Living with a girl like you, that's real happiness." When I was in a good mood, I could read 1,000,003 different thoughts in his head from just one glance and choose the most appropriate response to please him. For example, he'd call right after landing, asking what I wanted for dinner. If I was in a bad mood, I'd reply, "Whatever." But since the custom-made wedding dress from the UK he sent me had made me overjoyed, I said, "How about some pork rib soup?" The nearly 30-year-old man instantly gave me a demonstration of what it meant to be beaming with joy. Pork rib soup needs to be simmered slowly, with winter melon, scallions, and ginger slices added, letting the meat's freshness seep into the broth over low heat. While reading a novel, I kept an eye on the time, ensuring that the moment he walked through the door, he'd have the freshest sip of soup ready. He often said to me, "You're just like a robot." In this era, companion robots have long been available, from friends to lovers. If you have enough money, you can order a fully customized AI from Apple, tailored to your every preference, down to the perfect placement of freckles. Of course, some people find these things distasteful, arguing that a mere program lacks real emotions. He was one of those people. Even the AI in his car was an outdated version from the previous century. He said, "AI isn't going to make me pork rib soup." Actually, you can install a gourmet app in AI systems. If you have enough money, they could even whip up a full Manchu-Han imperial feast. The pork rib soup was ready, and he should have arrived by now, but the door hadn't opened. This unexpected situation made me a bit anxious. I checked the garage camera and saw him. I wasn't wrong. He had indeed come home. I just hadn't expected him, 3 days before our wedding, to be sitting alone in the car, staring at a photo. Of course, the photo wasn't of me. It was of a girl with golden hair, wearing a sailor uniform, with long legs, a slim waist, and a 30-60 bust. Every flattering adjective you could think of would apply to her. It was a face I knew all too well. He never knew that our so-called instant connection wasn't some mystical fate, but because we were actually high school classmates. He was in the class next to mine. I had known him long ago, and I also knew the girl in the photo. 13 years ago, I was 16, 153 centimeters tall, and weighed 200 pounds. What did that mean? It meant I couldn't have a desk mate because I took up the space of 2 people. No matter the season, I had an odd smell about me. All the beautiful aspects of youth had nothing to do with me. I was a walking sitcom wherever I went. Back then, I tried every method to lose weight. Then I saw an ad for weight loss surgery on the street, new high-tech fat dissolution. I was convinced it would work because it was at a price I couldn't afford. Expensive things must have their reasons. But I knew my family couldn't afford cosmetic surgery. So, I had to get a job, but with my body, the jobs available to me were extremely limited. That's when Sailor Moon came into my life. Their job listing was simple: females under 20 who liked games, with a good temper. The pay was so high that I thought I'd be willing to eat dirt for it. So, I applied. They watched me play a game, then decided I was the one. Only after signing an excessively strict confidentiality agreement did I find out what my job entailed. I suppose no one could forget the year 2040, when Huashing Company launched the first domestically produced companion robot. Compared to the ultra-realistic robots that would come later, the Sailor Moon series presented a kind of perfection akin to a Barbie doll. These robots had warm, smooth skin like humans, a figure so flawless it could drive top models to despair, and an adjustable voice box. She could do anything with you. Yes, anything. In the world of otaku, this was like a bombshell. Unlike a cold, inflatable doll, she had warmth and could think. According to users, interacting with Sailor Moon felt entirely organic. There was no sense of machinery at all. Every response she gave was indistinguishable from that of a human girl. But only we knew the real reason why the Sailor Moon robots could conquer the market so quickly. It wasn't because Washing Company had made any technical breakthroughs. It was because they cheated. Washing Company's AI technology was on par with that of any other AI company in the world. The reason Sailor Moon seemed so human was that each robot was actually controlled by a real person behind the scenes. Yes, it was all a massive lie to capture market share, and I was just a pawn in this deception. The design inspiration for the Sailor Moon robot series came from a globally popular anime from the last century. In that anime, the heroine would undergo a lengthy transformation sequence accompanied by music, turning from an ordinary high school girl into a sailor-suited warrior. Though, in my opinion, there wasn't much difference between her before and after the transformation. My transformation from a 200-pound girl into that blonde, twin-tailed beauty didn't require such a complex process. All I needed to do was put on a sensor, sit in the control pod, and countless data points would be transmitted to me through the robot's ports. Welcome to Robot 2240. Please input your information. I controlled the robot to open its eyes, smiling at the boy standing in front of me. But in reality, I nearly stumbled in the control room. I would never have guessed that my first customer, the owner of Robot 2240, would be Zhou Beichin. He was the kind of boy every girl experiences during her adolescence, handsome and brilliant, with that special touch of mystery typical of male protagonists. Throughout high school, his grades were always perfect. His expensive clothes and personal items also hinted that he came from a class far above the average. Of course, he didn't recognize me. In fact, he was very aloof at school, only interacting with a few persistent followers who clung to him, calling him Brother Chin. "Can I call you Lana?" he asked softly, gazing at me amidst a pile of packaging foam in his spacious, almost empty mansion. "I like it very much." I lowered my head, unable to stop myself from blushing. The sensor faithfully transmitted my reaction to the Sailor Moon robot. "Can you cook something for me?" he asked cautiously, so different from the arrogant boy he was at school. "What do you like to eat? How about pork rib soup?" "That sounds good, and some stir-fried pork with garlic sprouts too." The robot had a few basic programs, so I activated the cooking mode and began cutting the ribs. He leaned against the kitchen door, watching me cook. No boy had ever looked at me like that before. That day, he talked to me a lot, all meaningless chatter. It was the first time I realized that the top student's mind was filled with just as much trivial stuff as mine. For example, he gossiped about the math teacher's nostril size, complained about the cafeteria lady's shaky hands when serving food, and worried about whether girls were watching when he played basketball. "Lana, do you get bored when I talk to you about these things?" I love listening. This was genuinely true. No one had ever wanted to talk to me this much before. Zhou Beichin's followers called me Fatty Sister, and if I dared say something as simple as "excuse me" in class, their laughter would echo around me 3 times. In the end, Zhou Beichin fell asleep holding my hand. In the halo of the setting sun, his hair was a soft, tea-colored brown, and his youthful face was as beautiful as an exquisitely illustrated poster. I stared at the screen, nearly entranced. That is, until another button began beeping urgently, snapping me out of it. Each of us would control 2 to 3 robots at a time. Not everyone was as handsome and innocent as Zhou Beichin. Most users were more like the owner of Robot 2250, a stereotypical otaku whose greatest daily pleasure was making the robot strike various provocative poses. But he had set the robot's personality to auto, so I could say, "I don't want to do this." "Why?" He stared blankly at me through the screen, which was a bit amusing. "Didn't you buy me because you're too scared to talk to real girls?" If you keep being such a creep, I swear no girl will ever talk to you again. Then what should I do? I opened the encyclopedia panel. Eat less, stop masturbating so much, and read more books. I accompanied him to the bookstore, bought a stack of books, and carried them back, heavy in my arms. Then we spent half a day following an online workout video, doing exercises to lose weight. Just as we finally finished up, the button for Zhou Beichen's robot lit up again. That's how this job was. One side would go to sleep, and the other would wake up. Most of the time, I had to juggle 2 or 3 screens simultaneously. But, in a way, it was worth it. Through controlling the Sailor Moon robots, I experienced a completely different life. Even though my face was a distorted version of reality, Zhou Beichen's friends were always polite and careful around me. No matter how lame my jokes were, they would still laugh along with me. I even heard them enviously tell Zhou Beichen, "Brother Chen, if Lana were a real girl, I would definitely chase after her." Ordinarily, they would just throw my practice books on the floor and give me all sorts of humiliating nicknames. This job let me feel, for the first time, what it was like to have a light, slender body, to be a beautiful girl, and to talk to boys as an equal rather than being mocked and humiliated. At that time, my pursuit of beauty became almost obsessive. I underwent liposuction surgery, then threw myself into a crazy fitness regimen and gradually began refining the flaws on my face, monolids, a flat nose bridge. I neglected my studies and barely went home. I spent all my time in that control pod. I earned money this way to pay for one cosmetic surgery after another. If you had seen me that year, you probably would have looked down on me, too. I was just too desperate to be treated kindly. I seriously considered dropping out of school, but before that, I still had to take the exams. Going to school inevitably meant encountering Zhou Beichen. On the day of the final exam, I ran into Zhou Beichen and his group in the hallway. Of course, he didn't notice me, but his annoying followers were as obnoxious as ever. "Oh look, isn't that big butt fatty? Hey, she lost some weight." I kept my head down but noticed that Zhou Beichen was gently holding his stomach. He had severe stomach problems, and I knew that this morning, he hadn't had time to eat breakfast because he was reviewing his notes one last time. The thought made me uneasy. I remembered how he had once collapsed on his bed in pain from his stomach, how he had been studying late into the night for weeks in preparation for this exam. I couldn't hold back any longer. I ran outside and bought a loaf of bread, the only brand he would eat. I placed it on his desk. Good, no one noticed. When he entered the exam room, he saw the bread and hesitated for a moment before putting it aside. With his cautious personality, he usually wouldn't eat food of unknown origin. But halfway through the exam, I heard the sound of packaging being torn open. Pretending to be casual, I glanced up and saw him answering questions while taking a bite of the bread. He ate it. I couldn't describe or explain the joy I felt at that moment. It was like a wellspring suddenly gushing forth in the middle of a drought, or like the first blossoms appearing on the branches at the end of winter. I remember the subject was math, and I got my first ever score of 140. By that time, I could already fit into a size L, looking like just a slightly chubby girl. Outside of school, some people even told me, "You're pretty cute." I didn't really understand why I wanted to please Zhou Beichen, or why pleasing him made me genuinely happy. Maybe I was just instinctively trying to please everyone, thinking that by doing so, I could receive some kindness and get a little closer to becoming a Sailor Moon. But the result was exactly the opposite. That day, Zhou Beichen's followers suddenly blocked my way at the door. I stared at them, at a loss, not understanding what I had done to offend these people. Then one of the girls stepped forward and slapped my glasses off. "Are you some kind of freak?" She shouted at me. "Who gave you the right to give Brother Chen something like that?" A crumpled bread wrapper was thrown in my face. I stammered, trying to explain that it wasn't anything dirty, that it was just a piece of bread. But before I could finish, someone kicked me in the stomach. It hurt a lot, especially since I had just undergone liposuction surgery. The taste of blood filled my mouth almost immediately. I lay on the ground, gasping in pain. I understood then. There was no misunderstanding. The very act of giving Zhou Beichen bread was unforgivable. In class, the boys would often joke, "If you're lying, that means you like fatty," and the other would always vehemently deny it. "You're the one who likes fatty. Your whole family likes fatty." A fat, dirty, silent girl like me was supposed to stay hidden in a corner, never sullying their sight. How dare I even think of looking at the school prince? How dare I give him bread? And how dare he eat it? It was disgusting. As the blows rained down on me, I struggled to lift my head and saw Zhou Beichen's face in the crowd. He looked down at me, his expression a mix of anger and disgust, as if he were looking at some slimy creature. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't a monster, that it was just a piece of bread. I wanted to tell him that I didn't have any inappropriate feelings for him, that I just saw him as a friend. "Do you even know what you are? How dare you think you can like Brother Chen?" The beating grew more intense, and I curled up into a ball, covering my head. Finally, Zhou Beichen walked over. Those shoes were the ones he had chosen while joking with me that morning, and now they stopped right in front of my bloodied face. Zhou Beichen didn't hit me. Instead, he said coldly, "If I see you again, I'll let them beat you to death." That day, I sat alone in the control pod, staring at the screen. Zhou Beichen was leaning against a pillow, talking to Robot 2240. His face was calm and gentle once more. I could take revenge on him. I certainly could. After all, no one else knew that this sweet little prince wasn't as pure as he seemed. His father was indeed a wealthy American businessman, but Zhou Beichen was just an illegitimate child. His father wouldn't even look at him, only sending money. And his mother? That was even more interesting. She was a beautiful woman with wavy blonde hair named Lana, who had once caused a sensation in the entertainment industry 20 years ago. But she was quickly blacklisted due to her complicated relationships with men and eventually died of a drug overdose, leaving Zhou Beichen with nothing but a photograph. "What right did you have to look at me like that, Zhou Beichen? You're nothing more than a pile of filth yourself." On the screen, Robot 2240 had become stiff and mechanical without my control, which only fueled Zhou Beichen's anger. I hugged my knees, watching as he slapped 2240 across the face. Yes, this wasn't the first time I had been hit. Zhou Beichen would often have sudden outbursts of rage, just like now, violently beating Robot 2240, repeatedly punching the face that resembled his mother's, as if he could reclaim his lost dignity and family ties through the blows. There were many times when I didn't have time to remove the sensors, and the intense pain would knock me unconscious. But after the beating, he would regret it, cradling Robot 2240 in his arms and sobbing like a child without a home. If that hideous side of him were revealed, it would destroy him. Or I could do something else. After my series of cosmetic surgeries, no one would recognize me. I could completely transform. At that point, I could get close to Zhou Beichen. I knew all his preferences. It would be easy to make him fall for me. And then, I could hurt him as much as he hurt me. Wasn't eating my bread disgusting? Well, I'll make sure you're disgusted to death. I looked at him on the screen, a dark, twisted sense of pleasure surging within me. When I woke up from my memories, my face was already covered in tears. The air was filled with the scent of pork rib soup, and at that moment, there was a knock on the door. My newlywed husband stood there, looking at me in shock. "Honey, what's wrong?" I quickly adjusted my emotions, smiling as I replied, "Nothing. Are you hungry?" I made some soup. I went to the kitchen to serve the soup and wiped away my tears in the process. We sat on opposite sides of the dining table, each lost in our own thoughts. His thoughts were occupied by the photo of the blonde girl in his wallet, while mine were consumed by an endless, dark abyss. "Honey, do you know about the Sailor Moon series from Huaxing Company?" He suddenly broke the silence. I looked up as the moon drifted by outside the window. "Isn't that the fake robot company that got caught up in a scandal 10 years ago?" "Yes, I have something to tell you." He said, 10 years ago, I bought one of the Sailor Moon series robots." I knew, of course I knew, but why are you telling me this? That year, I had just started high school. My parents didn't have time to be with me, but they gave me plenty of pocket money. I was into anime at the time, so I bought the robot because it was trendy. Later, you might laugh at me for this, but I fell in love with her. He kept his head down, not daring to meet my eyes. I couldn't help but laugh. What did you like about her? Her pretty appearance? Her gentle, elegant voice? Or perhaps what you thought was her interesting soul? Her kindness. She was the kindest girl I'd ever met. He said she would spend nearly an hour talking to an old disabled beggar and would always separate plastic bottles from the trash for recycling. She'd grumble while buying chocolates for the kids in our neighborhood because their parents were never home. What stuck with me the most was one time when we came across a dead cat by the roadside, already swarmed with flies. She knelt down to carefully tend to it. She said, when it was alive, it must have been a beautiful, proud cat. Even in death, it wouldn't want to look this bad. His eyes softened. Don't you think she was something special? Yes, I just never thought you'd actually remember her. My vision blurred, and his voice became distant, almost inaudible. Later, Washing Company was exposed for faking artificial intelligence. I knew there was a real girl behind it all. To be honest, I've been looking for her for many years. What do you want to find her for? I heard myself ask. He scratched his head, embarrassed. At first, I wanted to tell her that she was my first love, but now I just want to thank her for changing my life. Back then, I was a sloppy, fat, and ugly shut-in. She helped me take small steps out of that closed-off world. He pulled out the photo from his pocket, showing me a girl with 2 blonde pigtails, big eyes, and a sailor suit. It was a look I knew all too well. Sailor Moon series, model 2250. I just never expected you to still remember her 10 years later. 10 years ago, I had just finished typing out the expose on Zhou Beichen, ready to hit send, when a notification popped up on another screen. A chubby shut-in was happily showing off his new figurine to me. Unlike Zhou Beichen, he was someone more like me. The days I spent with him didn't feel like heaven. We read books, studied, and did weight loss exercises together. Along the way, our relationship became much closer than mine with Zhou Beichen ever was. But in that moment, my heart was consumed by darkness, and I lashed out at him, cruelly insulting him with everything I had. I told him he was still a repulsive waste of space, that no matter what he did, people would always hate him. The reason was simple. I was jealous of him. Jealous of his wealth, his kindness, and the fact that despite being as ugly and fat as I was, he remained so sunny and good-natured. He was stunned for a second, as if he didn't recognize me at all. Then he stumbled out the door. Where was he going? I wondered maliciously. To cry? To complain about me? To vent his anger? That's right, be like me. Become a monster wrapped in negativity. But 10 minutes later, he came back. Do you like it? His chubby hands were holding a small cake, soft and white like a lotus flower. He said carefully, didn't you say you liked cakes last time? You can't eat it, but maybe looking at something you like will make you feel a little better. I'm a robot. I don't have feelings, I said coldly. I figured. He put down the cake and took out a small box, smiling as he said, this is the latest part from your company. It runs faster. If you install it, will your mood, your operations be smoother? I stared at him in disbelief. I just insulted you. We're friends, aren't we? He shrugged. Don't worry, I'll find a bad day to insult you back. But for now, I just hope you feel a little better. I looked at his chubby, gentle face on the screen, and tears streamed down my cheeks. Tell me, how can this awful world have never shown you an ounce of kindness, yet you remain so gentle? 10 years ago, I chose not to expose the truth. It wasn't because I forgave Zhou Beichen, but because I didn't want to destroy myself for his sake. Exposing a client's privacy would cost me more than just my job. It would also result in enormous penalties for breach of contract. I suddenly realized that transformation wasn't just about a change in appearance. Just like Zhou Beichen, who had a flawless exterior, but beneath it lay a twisted, tormented heart. I didn't want to become that kind of person. There are still many beautiful things in this world worth experiencing. The next day, Washing Company was exposed by a competitor. We were dismissed immediately. given a sum of money, and left. From that point on, Sailor Moon disappeared from my life as if she had never existed. Thanks to the tutoring I did at Joe Bachan's home, I got a second chance. I got into a decent university and gradually began to improve myself, losing weight, working out, taking care of my skin, learning to apply makeup. People started calling me a goddess. I was no longer that overweight, timid girl hiding behind Sailor Moon, begging for a false sense of happiness, slowly destroying myself in the process. I finally had a life of my own. At 29, I met that boy again. He had become as handsome as we had once imagined, and his heart was still bright and pure like sunlight. So, I recognized him immediately. The owner of Model 2250, I could finally greet you with my true voice. So, do you love me, or do you love her? I looked at my husband across the table and asked softly, "It's you." He thought for a moment and then added, "But sometimes I do wonder how she's doing." I smiled and decided to let my marriage have a small, harmless secret. I said, "I think she's probably an excellent girl now, married to someone she loves." After all, she was never swallowed by the darkness, Sailor Moon.